Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I'm going to show you how to make a spinner ring. I had a request in one of the comments from, I believe you pronounce it Miami, but forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but thank you for the suggestion. I know how to make a couple of different kinds of spinner rings, and I'm going to show you what I think is actually the more difficult one today, but in a future video I'll show you the easier kind. But before we get started, I wanted to thank you first of all for watching the video, and if you wouldn't mind, would you go ahead and hit that like button for me? That helps me a great deal as far as getting my video promoted. And if you really enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel, because then you'll get all sorts of this content. I've been doing about 2 to 3 videos a week, and I think it's pretty useful content, especially if you're a beginner silversmith. So with that being said, let's get started on the spinner ring. Okay, one of the things I probably talked about in the safety video is making sure to keep your hair pulled back when you're doing things like this. And so, just a reminder of that before we get started on the spinner ring. So, there's a couple of types of spinner rings. The first type that I'm going to show you has a central part that spins around an internal band, and it has a border on either side to keep it in place so it can't fall off of the inside ring. The other kind is it has a spinny part on the outside, but then the outside edges flare outwards to prevent it from being able to come off either side. And those are pretty easy to make, and I'll show you how to do those in another video. But for this one, I'm going to use a little bit of pattern wire. I just picked out a random one for this one. Rio, where I get most of my silver, has, I don't know, 20 different kinds of pattern wire you can choose from. And for the inside band part, I'm going to be using 26 gauge sheet, which is a relatively light gauge. For the border on either side of the spinny part, I'm going to be using 18 gauge round sterling silver wire, and I'll show you what we do with that. But let's see. So first off, we've got to figure out what size we're going to do. So let's say, one of the things you might note is that these things are generally made by a different company than these things, and so they don't always match up nicely on the size wise. But let's say this is the one that fits the person who I'm going to make the ring for. It's a 10.5. Slide it on here. It's actually a little shy of 10.5, so I'll measure a little bit below 10.5 there. And what I usually do is I'll cut a little piece of scratch paper. I'm going to try and make it roughly the size that the width of the band is going to be. And the way I'm gauging that is I'm thinking, you know, we're going to have this thing resting on top of a piece of sheet and then spinning around it. So I'm going to need a little bit extra on either side to put that border on. And now there's a little bit more than I need here, but I'm going to do a little bit more first and then file it down to get it as close as I can to the size that I want it to be. So we'll start there. So let me wrap this around my ring mandrel here. We said 10.5, or a little bit shy of 10.5, I think it was. So we'll center it around there. Let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to find an edge here. And that's about how long we need to make it. I lined this up with the edge of the piece of sheet there. Make a little scratch here. I'm going to make a mark because I think that was a pretty close on the width. That's pretty good size. And then let me see if I can find my ruler. My little ruler. I don't, as a rule, use a ruler much, but occasionally you want to get things pretty close. So that's about 3/8. So I'll measure it about 3/8 here. 3/8. And I can just kind of scribe a line there. Just like that. That's pretty close. Okay, so now I'm just going to cut out that rectangle. I'm doing this in an awkward position so you can watch what I'm doing. Sometimes trying to get stuff to show up on camera makes me hold it in weird ways that aren't the normal way I would hold it when I'm doing something. Alright. So, I think what I'm going to do next is I have this 18 gauge round wire, and I'm going to use this for the borders that keep the spinny part in the center, and so I need to cut. I'm going to cut one just a little bit longer so it's going to hang over the edge on either side. And then I'm going to cut one that's pretty much exactly the same size. And I may snip a piece of it off later just to make sure. I'll explain that a little more later. Okay, so that's the shorter one. This is the longer one. And I'm going to straighten this. I find that these flat nose pliers are great for straightening things because then you can just hold them, they don't ding up the metal much. And you can use your fingers to straighten things. I have the best luck with that. Thank you to all the new subscribers. I've actually just passed 350 subscribers, which is amazing. And thank you for all the nice comments. Okay. So I want to make sure this is nice and flat. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick a few pieces of small pieces of solder onto the wire, and then I'm going to balance it right on the edge of this, not on the outside edge, but right on top of the edge, so that it creates a lip there on this, so the sheet will have something that like has a lip on it that the sliding ring won't be able to cross over. So I'll cut some of these tiny pieces of solder here. The reason I'm using pretty small pieces of solder and pick soldering them onto here is because I don't want a lot of excess solder slop off to the sides of the wire, because when we go to solder on the final piece, get it too hot and there's a lot of excess solder inside of the part where the band is going to spin, you can accidentally solder it together. Nobody wants that to happen. And you'll have a non-spinny spinner ring. Okay. I'm just kind of moving it right to the very edge so it's right on the lip. And now I'm going to heat mostly the sheet because it's bigger than the wire. Getting it up to temperature is harder than getting the wire up to temperature. Okay, so that's pretty close. It's not exact, but it's good enough. And so now I'm going to file this edge down so it's flush. I was just making sure I had a clean solder joint all the way the whole length there. Without any gaps. Okay. So I'm going to snip off the little excess here. Spend a little time filing these flat. Okay, so I'm going to snip off the end of this piece of pattern wire here, save myself a little filing, and then file the end of it. So there's going to be a little bit of trial and error on this part here. There's probably a formula you could figure out to do it, but I've never figured it out. I usually cut the piece of outer wire that's going to spin around the inner part, you know, about 1/4 of an inch longer than the other one. Maybe a little more. I'd rather have it a little bit too big where I have to cut a piece out and size it down a little bit to get it to fit nicely around this thing after I make this into a ring than to have it too small, because this one I might be able to stretch a little bit. Thicker wire I probably wouldn't. So and the next step will be to turn this into a band now. Pushing these past each other in order to work harden the bottom of this thing just a little bit so that it's springier than it was, and so that these two ends will push together nicely when I go to solder them. So just got to fiddle with them until they're lined up nice and pushing together. The reason you want them pushing together, if you haven't watched some of my other videos about this kind of thing, when you heat the metal, that work hardening that we just created where it makes it springier by bending it back and forth will anneal out, so it becomes softer and softer, and sometimes the metal relaxes under the heat, just kind of goes and if you do that and it's just barely pushing together, it'll pull apart a little bit and leave a gap, and then it's really hard to solder a gap like that. Solder doesn't like to fill an empty space. So if it's pushing together pretty tightly, then even if it relaxes a little bit, it'll still be touching. So these ones, because we're trying to prevent getting a lot of excess solder on the outside, I'm going to solder it on the inside of the band here. So cut off kind of a skinny long one here. I'm filing away any excess solder that might have seeped through the seam there. And also any right up against the wire here. Just kind of using the corner edge of the file there to do that. I usually set this on my knee to do this so it softens the noise and also provides a more stable base for this thing so it doesn't slide around. I want this one to be pretty round. Alright. Our next step will be to make this into a ring. So I'm going to file the other side where I cut it off. So it's possible I'll have to cut this a second time and resolder it, but like I said earlier, I'd rather have it too big than too small to start with. think we had good penetration on the seam there. This looks to me like it's already going to be too big, which is fine. I'll cut it down a little bit more. Yes, we've got way too much extra space here, so I'm going to cut a little piece out. I got that pretty close to on the nose. It's a little snug. So what I'll do is I'm going to file the outside of this anyway, and I'm going to Dremel the inside of this, and we'll see where it's at. Just to get rid of the excess solder on the inside solder joint and any excess solder that might be on the solder joint here as well. So I'll probably use the Dremel on that, and I'll probably just use the file on this one. Clean it up all the way. I'm going to use the Dremel to do this one, so I'll be back in a sec. Where now it spins pretty freely. Okay. See, I have a lot to get rid of here. I have actually must have cut this a little bit bigger than I expected, so I have some filing to do. So I'm going to spend some time filing here, which I'll cut out most of, so you don't have to watch me file for a long time. But I'm going to get this down. I need to get it down to where this is going to be the second edge here, so pretty close to that. So I got to take off about almost 1/8 of an inch probably. The other thing I'm going to do is, now that we got this fitted over here, the only way to get this last ring on nicely is to make it a ring first and then push it down over this and then solder it on. So the next thing we'll do is we'll make a ring. But I want it to be really snug around there. That's why I cut this one exactly the same length. And I'm actually going to take a little piece off, because I'd rather have to stretch it a tiny bit to get it around there so that it's really snug. So I'm going to solder this into a little ring. Actually, while I'm doing that, I'm going to start this pickling a little bit. When we go to do the last solder joint here, up till now I've been using hard silver solder, which melts at about 1450 degrees. In order to reduce the risk of accidentally soldering this band onto the inner band, because it's got a solder joint there and there's hard solder here, this is one of the few times where I use a different kind of solder. And I'm going to use a little bit of easy solder for the very last seam where I solder that this ring that I'm going to make out of this onto there. So that'll be the next thing. So I'm going to pickle these guys to get rid of any excess flux that may cause solder to be inclined to stick somewhere else. So that's why I'm doing that. So let's do that for a while. I'm going to heat it up and throw it in the pickle. And in the meantime, I'll file these guys and solder it into a ring. So I can already tell this is smaller than 10 and a half. So I will be stretching it once that's all pickled, and I've filed that down a little bit. So we'll get that cleaned up, and then I'll do the last step, and then we'll pickle it for a little longer and then polish it. So, and then we'll make sure we've still got spinning action. So stay tuned. So we'll pickle those for a little while, and they're all cleaned up pretty nice. I'm going to even out the edges of the ring here. Any burrs that I might have formed here. Okay. Now I rounded this out, and it's a little bit small, so, and that's what I wanted because I like to stretch it just gradually until it just fits snugly over that. And to stretch it, I'm just kind of rotating the manual and hitting downwards on it. This little thin 18 gauge wire will stretch pretty quickly. Start to get close, sometimes I flip it over and see if it'll pop on there. Push down. I still think I got just a tiny bit more to go. Okay. Popped on there. Okay. So I think I said earlier in the video, I've used hard silver solder on all of these joints so far. For this last one, I'm going to do two things that I don't normally do. I'm actually going to kind of hand paint a little bit of flux on here. And I'm going to use easy solder so that I don't remelt the previous solder joints if I can help it. And that will give us a higher chance of that going well. Alright, so I'm just going to spray a little drop there, drop of flux on the table, and use a toothpick. I want to heat it just a little bit. So I want it to crust up on this top edge here. You can balance little pieces of solder on the edge if you want, or pick solder. I usually pick solder because that seems to be the way that I like to do things most of the time. So this is, like I said, easy solder. This melts at about 180 degrees less than the hard solder that I'm using. This is one of maybe two situations where I use a different kind of solder. For spinner rings like this, or when I'm making hinges, when I'm soldering in the pin, which is the very last solder joint in the hinge. Other than that, it's hard solder all the time. This is the stressful one because you don't want to overheat the ring, but you want to get it hot enough to where this actually sticks. So yeah, we're still moving. That's always the sketchy part when you're doing that last solder joint there. So, and I don't think I got it all the way around, so I'm going to go back and hit it again in a few spots here, and we'll see how it goes. So let me try this off again. So you got flowage around most of it, but I didn't get it right there. So. Cross our fingers that that thing's still moving. Okay, good. Yep, I still got spinniness. Cool. Okay, I'm going to let this pickle for a while longer. And then I will clean it up with the Dremel, take it to the polisher, and I'll bring back the final product for you so you can see what it looks like. Finished polishing, and here's the finished product. Doesn't really fit me, but you can see it spins on there pretty well. So I'll try and get a better picture and put it at the end of the video. But that's how you make Type 1 spinner ring. That was spinner ring Type 1. If you enjoyed this content, would you please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel? And feel free to share it with others who might share this interest as well. I wanted to thank you for watching again. I appreciate comments and suggestions, and I try to answer those as quickly as possible. And I'll also tell you when I don't know how to do something. Somebody asked me a question that I didn't have the answer for, and so I'll try to be honest with you when that's the case. So thanks again for watching, and happy silversmithing. See you next time.